D. Schmuckler. I'm going to be doing something here that feels kind of risky. I'm going to kind of bare my soul and tell you my truth as if I didn't have to hide a thing. It's part of what I've committed to at this point in my life. It's related to why I do these videos, but it's still kind of scary. And what's scary in this case is I'm going to be bearing my soul in some ways without any real confidence that people out there would be interested in hearing what I've got to say. I've noticed that there's sort of a difference between people's interest in other people when they're familiar with them, either in their own lives or like celebrities. If I see a celebrity that's important to me, I'll read what has been written. I read some biographies of movie stars, for example. I mean, they're meaningful people to me, some of them. But if I see somebody I've never heard of, which is happening increasingly, in the People column or something like that, as I get to the age I am now, so 78, if I see some name of some so-called, some pop artist or something I never heard of, sometimes I might take a look to see because the stories are sometimes interesting just in themselves, but I'm not really interested in the person. And so I don't really envision that I'm in a position where I would get the benefit of, I care about this person because this person is already a real enough presence in my world that I'd like to know a little bit more, like the way we read People magazine and read biographies. So that's what's kind of risky about this at the first level. At the second level, after I give the altruistic reason I'm making these videos, I'll give the fruit of what I've learned about myself, looking at what is it that drives me to do what I do. And what I do is I try to get a way of understanding that I've developed out into the world. Oftentimes it's just little pieces, but there is a big picture, and that's why my website's called A Better Human Story, and it creates a really wide-ranging, well-elaborated, thought-out fruit of over a half century's work, a picture of how we should understand the story of our species, our situation right now in the world. In addition, and really at the heart of why am I doing these videos, I believe that this thing that I've built as a way of understanding the human world, particularly the idea of that book back there, an idea from 1970. I've been trying since then to get it out into the world because I think that even just with that idea, it's a major, could be a major contribution to our understanding our situation and meeting our challenges better. I mean, I believed that for 54 years. And I've looked at it continually in that respect. I mean, I am doing these videos to get out an understanding that I believe will help human civilization survive. That's part of the gotta be honest. That's simply the truth. That's what I believe. And I would only ask you, in the context of this, which is before you just dismiss that, do you think it would have a beneficial impact on the human future if it were true and we understood that it were true, that we are better creatures than we have thought ourselves to be? Or one of the other ways that derives from is that the ugliness we see in human history is not an accurate picture of who we by nature are. And I do believe that I can prove it, but I'll just ask you, if you could prove that we were better creatures than we thought that we were, if you could prove, or at least really compellingly argue, that any creature on any planet that takes the crucial step of onto the path of civilization by removing itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically and inventing its own way of life. I think that the implications of that step have simply not previously been understood. And I try to demonstrate that it is inevitable that any creature that steps onto the path of civilization will be thrust onto a destructive path that endangers its long-term survival ultimately, that it unleashes a social evolutionary process, which is not a function of the creature's nature, but of the dynamics of the system into which they have inadvertently stumbled. I won't go further. But if you could prove that it was inevitable that our history would be this ugly and that we really are better creatures than we thought, don't you think that would have a beneficial impact? Also, if you could identify what that force was that emerged when a creature stepped onto the path of civilization, us in the case of this planet, don't you agree that if you could perceive the force and how it's worked, and that's what I've been spending my life on, that you'd have a better idea about how you could bring that destructive force under control? I believe all that. And one of the, the altruistic reason of why am I making these videos is that I feel like this thing's going to go to waste when I die, as things now stand. And I really got to do everything I can so that when I kick off this mortal coil, in not that many more years, the actuaries, I probably got 15 years, which gets me into my, 93 or something like that. I've seen people that survive too long, anyway. Thinking about what's going to happen after I kick off, at the moment, I don't really believe that anything like enough of this thing that could be helpful is out there in other people's minds. So I'm making these videos to see if, can I find some way of getting people to take a look at this thing? And if they see that it really does justify the claims, that they would incorporate it into their understanding well enough that it can have that beneficial impact in the world that's to come, where it looks like there's a good chance we might, as a civilization, destroy ourselves either through a nuclear holocaust or bringing down the biosphere on ourselves, like with climate change. It's really not at all clear we're going to make it for the long haul. So if anything I could do might, if there's a tipping point, to be had, it might make an influence if people had certain understandings in their head. And this is what I believe. I know what it sounds like. I mean, I've lived for a long time with the keeping a lot of myself hidden from most people. I mean, not a lot of myself. I'm a pretty open guy. But I mean, this sense that I've got something to offer that really could have an important beneficial impact. I went through many years because I know what it sounds like to claim that. And particularly if you're more or less of a nobody. I mean, I don't want to, what's the word? Make light of myself, like I've achieved nothing. But I feel basically like a marginal guy whose life mission was to get certain important ideas, starting with that one, The Parable of the Tribes, a prize-winning book that whose ideas somehow mysteriously disappeared from the world, unrefuted. A lot of mysteries in this life of mine, but in any event, I've been on this mission and I have failed. There are maybe tens of thousands of copies of that book, but it's not going to be out there as far as I can see. But on the other hand, I basically charge myself to be the fearless person that I believe in being, even though I'm not a fearless person. In fact, I'm thinking of doing a video about fear and how much I've moved into it over the last 20 years. Partly because of the way the world's been in America over those 20 years. And I think partly also it goes along with getting old. But anyway, the other video would be called My Shock Absorbers Are Shot. Is it the miles or is it the years? And I look forward to doing that. But in any event, this is, I feel, I believe in being the hero. That's very deep in me. If there's a situation where a guy's supposed to, rise to the defense of the good, I've always felt, like that's what I'm supposed to do. I could probably trace it some to what my father needed for me to act out. But, I couldn't understand the townspeople in High Noon, why they didn't, why so few of them were willing to step up to fight the fight. I thought a lot about that when I began the present stage of my mission, when I could see the fascistic force rising in America 20 years ago. And I couldn't rouse what I was hoping I could rouse. But I'm a failure and I'm a success. But I am a marginal person, and what I was trying to do, I have failed to do. But I'm still trying, and that's why I'm doing these videos. But I look a lot at, why am I doing this? In particular, when it really doesn't look like just because I'm willing to keep on leaving it all out on the field, it doesn't look like I'm going to succeed. What is the reason for doing this? And I won't go very far down the aisle of legacy stuff and art for the sake of the art, which mean a lot to me. I think about somebody like Van Gogh, who nobody ever bought any of his pictures, and yet the man was still expressing himself in these incredible ways. I think that there's a beauty in that, of simply the value of expressing what one's got, one's best capacities, just because that is being who you're supposed to be. So I required of myself to think I was fearless, and I'm out here saying, please go to a betterhumanstory.org and see if these claims look valid. And if they do, you're the kind of person who can get into the idea of absorbing a system of understanding, like the way, back a half century ago, a lot of people used Freud's big structure of thought, and a lot of people used Marx's big structures of thought. That's what I really feel like I got to achieve. And before I would say I wasn't a failure. I don't know that there's much chance of that happening. But one of the reasons also that I do it is because, as I've seen and looking into my heart, is that there's a part of me that that needs the recognition. I mean, it's been a great trip and very meaningful. I feel very fortunate in my life to have gone down the path that I've gone to get to where I've got what you'd find on my website, A Better Human Story. That should be enough. And it is. But I don't know that there's much prospect that anybody's going to my website and saying, yeah, you look at this piece, piece called The Ugliness that We See in Human History is Not Human Nature Writ Large. And it gets kind of demonstrated the truth of that, importance of that truth. If you go there and you see, okay, well, that is an interesting idea, and that isn't out there. The step across into civilization really does have that un, unrecognized implication, so that the spirit of the gangster is going to be given a disproportionate role in determining. If you're the kind of person who would, seeing that that first piece holds water, well, let's see what this whole thing is. I don't know that anybody's been doing that. And my upbringing was, and here it's getting risky again. My upbringing was getting trained to receive love in the form of applause. I don't think I've ever put it quite that way, but basically understood that the first 21 years of my life, I got my goodies doing something that other people would applaud. And it started at home, particularly with my mom, who was a great teacher, who encouraged one to perform, and then was very generous with her applause. I got a lot of my goodies then for all the years when I went out into the bigger world, performing and getting recognized for it. Graduated first in my high school class. I worked very hard. I've got certain abilities in large measure, and I was determined to make the most of them. I mean, it was to take the achievement to the highest possible level, to get the most possible applause. It turned out I wasn't going to be able to perform on the on the basketball court, or even less on the football field, enough to get that kind of applause. But I had some other places where my strong suit was well suited to getting the applause. So I graduated first in my high school class, and went to Harvard and got prizes, and graduated summa cum laude, and was getting all the applause as I kept on striving to get better and better and better in realizing my gift. And that's why my mom was such a great teacher, is that I think she taught, just the development of one's gift as being sort of like, an assignment from God. So, and a really kind of interesting thing happened to me. At the age of 21, I get the summa cum laude from Harvard, and I everything I compete for as a graduate student in terms of fellowships, everything comes my way. Things happen in my life and my world, and long story short, that idea comes to me in 1970 and changes everything. As far as I have ever believed, what I got summa cum laude from Harvard for doing work and understanding basic things about our human civilized cultural world, that took it to a whole much higher level. It was way beyond that which 3 years before had earned me a summa. And the interesting thing is that as soon as I took that path, my whole fortune in the world deteriorated. Before that point where my work became actually really important, a big deal, much bigger deal, my one loss record was, almost no losses. I didn't get a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship of all the ones I applied to. That was the only loss up till through the age of 21. And then after the age of 24, when that comes, my one loss record in terms of getting what I apply for, not necessarily as a student, but in a whole lot of other respects. When I got way better than I had ever envisioned at the age of 21 I might ever get, and this feels risky to say, but I mean, it's just the truth. I basically have struggled to survive the ensuing years. I've succeeded. It's a little bit of a miracle, but I've mostly had to give myself away, for example. I wasn't willing to go to a high school reunion until the 20th reunion because having been voted most likely to succeed by my senior class of 430 or whatever it was, I felt humiliated with the thought of going there and not having succeeded in any way that the world might recognize. The class might reasonably think, boy, we sure blew that choice. But in 1983, at the 20th, I felt, I could hold my head up because that book was about to come out from the University of California Press. And I thought that book was actually going to have a big impact on the world right away, like it did on me. Like that idea, that vision did on me. I don't think I ever envisioned that you could get it out in the world and show it to that extent and not have much of an impact. And 6-8 years later, the idea, never having been refuted, nobody ever laying a glove on it, has basically disappeared from the world. So that even books that get published that you would think it would be in the bibliography of, it doesn't show up. I never envisioned that possibility, and I still struggle to understand how that happened. And I've got ideas, but I'm not satisfied to really understand it. But anyway, my need for recognition, I'm not proud of it, the vanity aspect or whatever it is, but having been trained for the first 21 years, first at home and then in the wider world, that I can get all my goodies by performing at a very high level. And then to have the previously inconceivable experience of performing at a higher level than I had previously ever even imagined, and not getting any of that applause, or really not very much applause. To the extent that while my star seemed to be rising in the first 5 years after this book came out, there was a sense of the world coming to me. Here I am on my way, I assumed. But no, I became more marginal. I even got to the point where my books, of which I am proud that they're all pieces of a picture that is a big deal. they didn't do well enough in terms of sales that I ceased to become a saleable commodity. That book started putting me on the map. I just assumed it was just going to take off from there, but it didn't. Not for my want of trying. I went around the country, talks at the universities, delivered this thing which I thought would, blow people out of the water. So I went from winning all of them to almost all of them to losing almost all of them. And I was sort of thrown back into my life to get my goodies from the fact that I could I could continue I could survive while continuing to develop this thing into all that it could be if you give the young man I was at the beginning of my 20s, if you give him, let's see, what would it be? Well, here I am still doing it. So it might end up being more than 60 years making the most of this thing. Having to deal also with the fact that I don't get that recognition. This isn't this isn't the way I was supposed to get fed. I've been wrestling with that since my ideas became important. I've been wrestling with weaning myself off of that need for recognition. But things that are instilled as deeply as that, at least in me, don't go entirely away. And so it means a lot to me. There are people who relate to me. And, some people in my life with whom I'm not the nobody. Uh, I get enough recognition to be okay, but I really, when I tune in on myself, I can see there's still that kid that was performing for his mom and doesn't feel loved like he wants to feel loved because he's offered up, "Hi, Mom, here's what I did, here's my performance," and then getting that beaming, "Oh, how much we appreciate the performance," kind of stuff back. You know, I don't know if I'm more rigid than other people in terms of basic patterns like that. But, I would say, well, I've had a lot of years to let go of that need as much as I've got it. But it's really still there. I mean, every time I get into a space where I get blown away myself by, some new piece to the picture, and I think, oh, I wish there are people who could see how this connects this with that and all part of this really meaningful picture. And I realize that, that little kid is still there wanting recognition. And there's a third level also having to do with my own needs. Sometimes I've been, in recent months, I've been lying in bed, having had a painkiller for the bad headache that was keeping me from getting to sleep. And the pharmacological effects of the painkiller, plus the fact that I'm lying in bed awake, lead to my having an unusual and meaningful unfolding of thoughts and images. And I see something about myself on those nights. I don't know, whether it's how that connects with that particular drug. I don't know, but it feels meaningful to me to see how much is about wanting to make a real connection with people, just like human being to human being. That there's a feeling of, in me, of isolation that goes kind of deep. And I don't think that everybody has it in the same way. I think that there are things about the beginnings of my life that I think my brother has pointed. He's a clinical psychologist. Uh, it wasn't. It wasn't comfortable being my first few years of life with respect to feeling securely and positively connected. There's stuff going on with my mother's health and stuff going on with my mother's dynamics. And also, not, not a minor thing, something having to do with what in 1946 pediatricians were telling mothers to do, which included a lot of let them cry it out. Don't give in to your impulse to go into the baby who's crying. I've had kids. That wasn't the policy when I was dad. But it was what the pediatricians told parents to do in 1946 when I was born. And all those factors together, I think, created a kind of a hole in me, a sense of not being secure in the positive connection with the other people in my world I want to feel positively connected with. I saw during those nights, I would see how much, for example, I write an op-ed piece that's published every week in the part of the very Republican, red, Trumpian Shenandoah Valley where I live. And it is amazing to me when I perceive how important these people are to me in some way, that I'm writing these pieces with a desire to make a connection, that I care about them in a way that is a little bit mystifying to me. I attribute it to the really important relationship I had with a lot of these people when I did 10 years of talk radio with them on some fairly deep stuff we would talk about. And I kind of loved them. And maybe that's why I feel, but in any event, I'm aware that what I'm trying to do with them, with my work, I mean, each week I'm putting out something which is sort of my best attempt to ply my craft in 880 words or something like that, to reach out to these people and make some kind of a good connection. I see that there's a need in me for me to feel like there's some positive mutual regard in that relationship. But I don't really think that there probably is. And every other place where I perform, like right here, I'm bearing my soul, sharing things in exactly the terms that I understand them myself, even though there is risky areas to it, or at least I experienced them as risky. Because there's another reason I make these videos is I'm offering like the best I can find in myself to be able to offer. And that's my basic love language with respect to humanity at large. give my best, and to be welcomed in as a presence in a way for that performance. I recently did a video about Leonard Cohen and how blown away I was by he had a relationship with a whole lot of people where they had taken him as the soul and the human being that he was, that he showed himself to be in his music and his lyrics. They had taken him in, and if I had the idea of having that feeling with an audience, to give one's best performance, to offer something that really has value, then to share in that and come together in that. And this thing that I'm offering, I do think that if people were to take it in, they would feel that, just like Leonard Cohen with his beautiful stuff, gives people something that fills an important space inside. What this better human story offers includes things that are opening and fulfilling also at that level. It's a way of understanding, but it has certain consequences. It has certain consequences like you find out that the idea of a battle between good and evil refers to a very important reality about what goes on in the world. So it's not, it enters into some important spiritual terrain by virtue of the multidimensionality of the thing that's been put together. It shows that value, the moral dimension, and the dimension of the spirit are ideas that refer to an important reality that emerges out of evolution and that is manifest in what we are by nature. It brings in the religious traditions' insights about certain things, about the importance of good versus evil and the importance of honoring the spiritual dimension of our experience in the Bible, but not in the secular world. So what I'm saying is that this thing that I'm offering is not built with the kind of get right to your heart stuff like hearing Leonard Cohen sing Alleluia with all these different kinds of verses. The poetic power and the musical power and the power of who he is there as a singer right there where you're experiencing him in a sensory kind of way, the human being that he is. An exceptional human spirit that's making contact at the spiritual level. It offers all those levels. And I am coming from that place, and it would be fulfilling to me if I felt like, and I do get this sometimes. It's not like I get nothing. I mean, with those, it's very important to me when a friend comes to me and then expresses something about what they got from something that I had shared with them, those friends who make me feel appreciated that way, I feel like they're an important kind of friend that the other ones who don't give me that, because that's so much what's important to me about me. So the human contact is different from the recognition. And the fact that this thing that I want to be recognized for and that I wish to feed to the minds, hearts, and spirits of as many people as I can, that I believe that we're facing challenges that we may or may not be able to meet. This Better Human Story has illuminated for me the rising force of fascism. Since the early 90s, I've been perceiving what was rising because of this thing. It would have been much better had we on the other side from this rising force of fascism, had recognized earlier on what we were up against. And that's the title of that book up there, What We're Up Against. But here we are, where what's best about our country is in danger of being overthrown by what's worst about our country. The battle between good and evil occasionally takes a rather vivid form. It's so important that we win that battle, we who are committed to the good. And so it's good to have a map of the battlefield and to understand the nature of the enemy's forces, how they're deployed, and to get a more comprehensive strategy for dealing with the destructive force. To perceive more accurately where we are in the evolutionary process, starting with extricating ourselves from our biological niche and entering the path of civilization, and going all the way toward either destroying ourselves or getting our act together, neither of which is a foregone conclusion yet. There is a need to understand better what our situation is. We've created a very complicated world, and the extent to which we understand what we're dealing with is really pretty primitive, don't you think? I mean, how much conversation do you ever hear about anything that sort of puts it not just one damn thing after another? And we're supposed to navigate ourselves successfully to a kind of human civilization on this planet that can survive for the long haul. Every once in a while, people seem to take a look at the whole and where we got to go, and they do things like create the United Nations and Human Bill of Rights and Law of the Sea. But we really don't have much of a map. It's easier, I think, to let something in that's more a key directly into our core, bypassing the intellect and getting straight into the emotional centers. Music is an emotional language. Poetry is a way of making deep connections. Combine them. there's a lot of stuff that comes together that's plugged into a lot of the things that we have feelings about. That's not the main language of my better human story. It's there, but the value of it has to do with the assembling of a whole lot of reason and evidence to build a multidimensional structure that makes a lot of sense and has important implications. It's an intellectual task to get to the spiritual and moral transformations that are required in today's secular worldview. It goes to those levels, but the root is down the intellect. And you know, I think the evidence is clear that when people step forward in civilization with some kind of message that has important implications, makes important connections, that music is going to excite a lot more people than any kind of system of understanding. It's just, I would say, evolutionarily, my guess is that human beings never developed anything of a very elaborate system of understanding that was at all important until civilization was well along, the ancient Greeks and stuff like that. My guess is that all of our hunting and gathering ancestors had ways of thinking, but that they were never an elaborate intellectual system. And it wasn't developed in any kind of systematic way. I'm guessing that it had certain basic pieces that were sort of laid down, like the way the Ten Commandments basically answers a whole bunch of questions. But if you ask, well, what is it that Leonard Cohen has had that, I would bet that for hundreds of thousands of years, there were people singing around campfires with hunting-gathering groups, making music and expressing themselves with some kind of lyrics, maybe, with some uses of the voice, in ways that people responded to. I recognize the downside of there being something which is more superficial when it becomes sort of, what's the word, cerebral, intellectual. But there's a reason why things change with civilization in that respect, because we have created a world that we are not yet competent to deal with. And we need to deal with it. I mean, that is really the only job, is to deal with this world that we've created. Everything else is sort of secondary. And so it becomes important for us to understand the complicated world that we're in. If you let go of what the religious traditions provided, that handed down about good and evil and all that stuff, there's still the needs that fulfilled. And also, I think the fact that we have those needs is in itself evidence that the religions have been right in that respect. But sometimes the the scientific way of thinking that gives rise to the secular worldview. Let's go of all that religious stuff, but doesn't necessarily do the work of restoring the important things that got lost when religion was left behind. So to take another risk. So I realize I'm asking people to do something which is highly intellectual. But at the core, my sense of really what I am is connected with the line of the prophets. That is who I once experienced myself to be, a Hebrew prophet. When I was lying on a massage table, it just came to me. When I plunged into the political arena back in 2005, it was with an essay called that what we needed was a prophetic social movement. I tried to recruit some prophets like what's his name, the Bill Moyers. I had an exchange with him. I didn't want to be the prophet. I wanted somebody with a platform to deliver what I was calling a prophetic message. But it is an important part of what we need, requires thinking systematically in ways that allow us to build the worldview that we need to be able to see what's going on. So, I know I'm not going to have the effect that Leonard Cohen is, but there is a place to get to together that's very deep and very rich and is filled with the Spirit. And it's got to do with this incredible experiment that life has conducted. First, in developing a whole system of life on Earth and all that entails. And then to giving birth to a creature that becomes the first one to invent its own way of life. Because it has a special kind of consciousness, which takes capacities that some other animals have and takes them to a point where something can take off. First culture and then civilization. That there's a way of understanding where we are and things that might help us get a handle on them. Help us ask the right questions. And look and start talking about what the right answers will be. Like how do we get from here to a world in which it will become impossible for two superpowers to blow up the planet with their nuclear exchange, like almost happened in 1962. Questions like that. Where can we get to where we wouldn't have a world where an industry can cripple the whole of world civilization from responding to a potential environmental catastrophe, like completely disrupting the climate system of the Earth? How do you build a world where that couldn't happen? How much time anybody spending looking at it? If you take the map that I'm laying out, there are a lot of questions that arise, which are the ones that need to be asked. And we've got a responsibility. If it takes a system of thought to get the secular worldview to incorporate some important truths that they haven't honored, well then, that's part of the price we pay for having stepped into this civilizational process, where we've had to deal with a lot of stuff that's been very unpleasant for our ancestors to deal with. Marauding soldiers and situations of anarchy. The strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. Yeah, it's a challenge. And I'm saying part of the challenge is to take on the intellectual task to see if there's an understanding here. All those levels, for all those reasons, that's why I'm doing these videos. I want to make contact with you from the deepest place that I've ever seen, what's really closest to my heart. I want to be recognized for the performance I just did, taking a bow and feeling somebody's out there is clapping. But I wouldn't be doing it if it weren't also true that I think that this better human story can help democracy defeat fascism in America and around the world, and can help human civilization get itself together before it destroys itself. All three of those are why I make these videos. I appreciate your listening.